Are you videoing?
Yeah.
You're supposed to let us know that. Which is like.
May I video that? There was an announcement at the beginning that said it was going to
that
be
we
taped.
were, right, so.
Yeah.
I'll walk you through this.
With us tonight, we have Mr. Peter Larkin from Mass Broadband Institute to talk a little bit about what's going on. And then we're probably going to have some discussion afterwards.
Yeah. Keep going. I've got this. Good evening. I'm Peter Larkin. I'm actually a special advisor to the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, Jay Ash. And back in 2000, and what would be helpful here is I want to give you a little bit of the background of the Mass Broadband Institute and how we found ourselves where we are today. Okay, so I was tasked or asked by the governor and lieutenant governor back in May of 2016, myself and Bill Hennon, to come in and sort of reset the Mass Broadband Institute and where we were going. And this goes back to the recent editorials you've read about the middle mile, going back in 2009. Over 50 million, let's call it $40 million $50 million was appropriated by the state and was matched by the federal government to begin this middle mile, which brought broadband to 115, 120 different communities in Massachusetts. And the middle mile was supposed to grow the last mile being broadband to the home. The middle mile was going to serve what's called the community anchor institutions, which happens to be like the police, the fire, the town halls, and the like. And that was an $89 million venture. The state matched those dollars. Interestingly enough, it was when in 2008 when they were trying to put jobs on the street after obviously the financial implications that were hitting the state at that time. So we came in 2016, this administration came in actually in 2015, January 2015. And after about a year of looking at the proposal that was in front of us, what happened is 2014, after the middle mile was built, another appropriation was sought by the legislature for $50 million to bring the last mile forward. But that $50 million at the end of the day only represents a third of the cost of what would bring broadband to a community. There are 53 cities and towns, you see them all here, they're identified. It had, 9 of them had what they call underserved communities, and 44 of them were non-served. So we're only talking 2016, this administration decided that at the time they were planning, the previous administration was planning a one-size-fits-all solution. They're going to bring broadband to all the communities. The communities had to put up 2/3 of the money to do it, and the state's dollars would only represent about 1/3 of what the costs were. And we thought it was a daunting task, this new administration, and they said, hey, listen, there's many towns that just don't have the financial wherewithal to do that. And yet at the same time, this administration said, well, what would work? And they said, listen, we're going to have to do this one by one by one. We're going to have to figure out a way, and every town's going to have their own issues that we're going to have to deal with. So what they did then is we began in 2016 to rethink how we could do it, because the one side wasn't going to work. It really came down to what would work. And one of the avenues that we took, okay, at the time, was to ask the cable companies to look at bringing and extending their services out to the other communities that aren't served right now. Now, they're not here for a reason. There was no return on investment for them. That was the bottom line. In fact, when you talk to the cable companies back then, you'd ask them, well, what are you looking for? And their statement to us was, we'd like to go buy 25 houses in a mile, and they want a 50% take rate. You know what your communities look like. That was a challenge. So we said to them, well, what else can we do? We knew that the towns themselves were struggling with building their own in terms of just dollars and cents. And at the same time, we put these towns to what we call a readiness process. What it would take to bring broadband to your community. And we built out a model, and in the case of here in Egremont, we call it a Cartesian model. And at the time, we allocated the $50 million to every town, depending on households and miles of lines that they had to string fiber and the like, because it was thought to be a fiber network. Okay, and the allocation for the MBI allocations for Egremont at the time was $1,070,000. Again, the thought was that the town themselves then would go and borrow money to build their own. What we're trying to do is recognize that That's a daunting task for a lot of towns. In the Cartesian model, again, this is back in 2014, 2015, the envision of that envisioned that a Cartesian build out in that community, in your community, would have been $2.9 million.
What is the meaning of the word Cartesian?
Cartesian is the model.
Context.
Je pense, donc je suis.
Yeah, it's true. I shouldn't use Cartesian because it does deflect you. But what it was is we put it through what we call a table top analysis of what it would take to bring broadband in each community. And we measured it out in terms of, and they brought on all these consultants to do it. And they brought through, how many miles that they had to go, how many households they had to hit, they looked at topography, they looked at other challenges that were there. And it was really sort of a high-end look at this. And at the time, just in Egremont's situation, they thought it would cost about $2.9 million. So the town contribution to that project, given the MBI allocation was $1,070,000, was an expectation at that time that, given a model, it was $1.8 million the town would have to come up. That's a daunting task for anyone. And these were the circumstances that a lot of towns were looking at. So we went out and we solicited the cable companies. And as I said earlier, they weren't here for the simple reason, return on investment. They do, however, serve 96% of what's served in Massachusetts now. And that's not unusual in a lot of states. Cable companies are usually your provider of internet in many of these communities. And it's becoming a more and more important part of their product mix. And in some ways, that's what's evolving now under our feet. And so what we did back then is we said to them, okay, what would you do if we gave you the allocation for the town? And said to them, what could you build with this allocation? And so we got what we call a private provider RFP. It went out in December of 2016, of which Egremont got a proposal in about 5 different towns, and it was unseverable. There were actually other towns that they fell off, and they needed critical mass is what they would argue. They needed critical mass, and they needed all 5 towns involved. At the end of the day, they actually offered us 7. They came back to us again with another proposal. The numbers moved around. At the end of the day, they took a proposal and they said, listen, we'll go forward. They said, well, there's another caveat. We need to go in and really sort of do our due diligence. And he said, what we'd like to do is, he said, upon the conclusion of the franchise agreement, that we would all come in an understanding of what our commitments will be. We could not hold their feet to the fire prior to that. Because they were coming in, basically, we were begging for them to come into these communities. Because we had no other solutions. So they came forward and they gave a relatively fair analysis, but at the same time, circumstances from their perspective has changed underfoot. Now, we didn't stop and wait for the cable companies, because Charter came in and they were going to serve 4. We had other communities that were offered from Comcast, but other communities decided to build their own. And what we created after that was what we call a Housing and Economic Development Last Mile Grant Program. And what we have there in the orange situations you'll see, for example, those are the communities that are building their own. They believe strongly enough and they have the financial wherewithal that they believe partnering with Westfield Gas and Electric is their best solution. So this is sort of a town decision, and every town by town makes that decision. And you've seen down on the lower end of the quadrant here in Massachusetts, one of the early ones was Mount Washington. Went forward with their own plan. They built their own. I think they had about 125 households at the time. And it was, they've taken risks and they're going to own that. And that's their choice. But they only had the allocation of the state, and then they had to solicit through subscribers of their own townspeople to pick up the rest. And that's what's occurring. So if you look at the map and you go through it really quickly, you'll see in the blue are the Comcast proposals. And of those, there were 9 towns that were what they call underserved. And they had less than 96% coverage. That's the only standard we had, 96% coverage. And our broadband speed was 25 megabits download and 3 upload, which is actually the federal standard. Now, we're hopeful that they're going to be higher speeds and a higher capacity, and that's what the cable companies are doing, because they see, as I said earlier, that their internet offerings are really sort of becoming critical to their mix of products that they're providing to communities. So we did the blues, we're Comcast, the greens are the charter proposals, and then we have the blue, or the orange are the, what they call the last mile grant towns, which are going it alone. And then of course we have the yellows, which are outliers of their own reasons. Monterey is working with Fiber Connect, as is Mount Washington. Peter Sham is going with a company called Matrix. Warwick is building their own wireless network. And in the pink, we have these three towns, Monroe, Florida, Savoy, and Hawley, which are building what they call a wireless initiative. Now, wireless is less costly because they don't have to necessarily find space on poles, which is really the real high cost of building a network. What I had sent to you, Mary, and I have some here today, I'll pass it around. It's like the make-ready work. The make-ready is really, you can pass some of these back. If you read these things, move you one, pass a little bit around. I don't have one off for everybody. It's like if you're sitting together each other, if you can share, it would be helpful. Sorry about that. I didn't know how many people would be here. I did that. So, but the high cost in this whole project, whether you're building your own or it's the cable company, it's called the make-ready. And the make-ready is finding space on the pole. And if you haven't got space on the pole, or you're bringing in something new, it's a construction project of its own accord. And you gotta find that space. And in circumstances here in Egremont, given what they faced with after some analysis, Carter stepped back and realized that the cost of bringing this forward was another $1 million that they didn't anticipate. Now, the only thing we had to hook them on was the cable franchise agreement. We couldn't hold them before to that arrangement. We had to ask them beggingly, could you come forward into a community and what could you build? And in many respects, they're doing that very same thing. Now, even in Egremont's case, they went forward with making pole applications and actually doing their due diligence. And when they went out there, they found out that there's about 150 poles that are short. There's not a lot of space on those poles, and they're going to be replaced. And those things can run.
Yeah, because someone's started.
That's part of what happens. That's part of this beauty of the private sector. So it's not like you don't have a broadband solution per se. It may not be the one that you might want from an affordable standpoint or whatever you want, but they're bringing a fiber product forward. But here we are today. There's a lot of advantages of having a cable company with a triple play option for
It's the one that
enterprise.
MBI does.
What? This is the town's decision. This isn't MBI's decision. These are all the town's decision. But it really comes down to what do you want to pay for what you're going to get? Those are the questions you're asking yourselves. What do you want to pay for what you're going to get? And at the time when they were talking, and I use the term, the Cartesian model, it was fiber, it was 1 gigabit speeds up and down and all the capacity, and it provides tremendous capacity, but did you need all that? That's an internal question that the towns have to grapple with. So here we are today with a new offer from Charter, because they found out that they couldn't.
From Charter or from MBI?
From Charter.
From Charter.
This is Charter. It's not MBI.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, this is not MBI's thing. So
Where is MBI? Is there a
We're-
representative from MBI?
I happen to be the chair of the Mass Broadband Institute. Okay, so I represent MBI.
Okay.
I'm the special advisor to Secretary of Economic Affairs.
I understand that, I appreciate that. But what about Charter? If Charter is the organization, is there a representative of Charter here?
There isn't here, but they should be here, but not necessarily, they weren't asked at this meeting to come here. It was asked by the board to come in and explain the proposal that has come to us by way of Charter to MBI to extend it to the town.
What does MBI do for a living?
Mass Broadband Institute is charged with bringing offers to towns to build broadband.
So you just bring the offer,
We bring the offer.
So is it
and
fair
that's
to,
all.
is it fair to say that
Then
this
why
was,
are we interested in what you're saying?
Because I'm presenting the context of the offer you're receiving from Charter.
is it fair to say that this
Did
was,
you do the same for Fiber Connect?
Fiber Connect is, we put out a request for proposal to private providers,
Yes.
and Fiber Connect made an offer to Monterey. They didn't finish the proposal. There's still unanswered questions, and they still remain. They can still, well,
Funny, they're providing broadband in my house.
that proposal,
Very
the
fast.
private provider RFP has now been closed, but we have what we call a flexible grant program. In the flexible grant program, it's offers that can be made to communities that they were so willing that the towns would decide that they want less than 96% coverage. Because better that than no coverage. So we've been putting proposals on the table trying to attract private providers to bring things forward.
So is it fair to say, just to be clear, that this is a joint MBI charter proposal?
No, this is a charter proposal.
So you guys didn't work this out
Well,
in the same
no,
room
well,
together?
here's what we tried to do. Let me give you what we tried to do, okay? What we did is we went to the flexible grant program now. We went for the private provider RFP back in December of 2016. Mid-year, in the fall, or let's call it the summer of 2017, we realized that we weren't getting enough private providers to come forward. So the thought and discussion with communities was to say, would you be willing to look at a proposal that was less than 96% coverage? And the town said yes. So we came forward with another a request for proposal called a flexible grant program. And with that, we did get an offer for New Marlboro that was considered and being considered now, okay? There was also offers from Comcast for Charlemont and Middlefield and Worthington. And of course, on the same auspices, there is a grant now being offered by way of the flexible grant program. In other words, the charter would offer here for Egremont. Now, what we had done for those communities, and this is true, is we have new authorizations for new money. Those HED last mile grant programs, there's about 20 of those communities. We set aside what we call a contingency fund for the make-ready costs, because we know that's a real expense. So what we might have anticipated for expense, we said to the town, listen, we're trying to help you make that whole by providing, set aside $12 million to help you make the make-ready costs. At the same time, we looked at these flexible grant programs, and we said, listen, given what the offers are on the table, the state said through the MBI that we were willing to lean in and match the gap. So there's a gap in funding that has occurred. And we at MBI thought that it was a bona fide proposal that we would be willing to share in half the cost. And that's what we're doing here in Egremont. And if you look through the Egremont proposal, because I know it's been posted, right here. Okay, Charter originally proposed to build out 96% of Egremont for actually $1,185,000. Remember, your allocation was $1,070,000. So remember, it was a 5-town combined offer on the private provider. When all those 5 towns were kind of put on the table, actually it was a good win for the state because it was like, I think it was a $500,000 savings under their allocations. Now, I use Princeton as an example. There was Princeton, remember, it was unseverable, and they said, listen, we'll do it if we do these 5 towns together because they need critical mass. So we thought it was a good deal for the Commonwealth. We said yes. They brought it before us. The only caveat and the only thing we could hold them to is once they completed the cable franchise agreement, would they commit to the letter of the dollars that they would ask for. Now, frankly, it's taken a while. It's not unusual. It takes some time to negotiate. So what happened is they've come forward and they've said to themselves, wait a minute, we got 150 poles still up here. We have untold make-ready costs that weren't anticipated. We'd like to come back and make another counteroffer. This is only after we went to them and said, listen, you can't just leave the town alone. And so they came with an offer, and frankly, the offer now stands. They expected, they would hope for a $2,285,000 offer, okay? The gap in funding is $1,215,000, and MBI and HED would be willing to pick up 50% of that cost, but the other 50% would fall on the town. Now, let me just finish. The whole point that I would bring forward to you, that if you had to build it yourself, the expectation was the town was going to have to borrow over $1.8 million. Now, we're trying to be, fiscally conservative about that, and we're trying to lock this in. So that's the reason that we want to bring this forward.
This is so outrageous.
all right.
What was the big dig? Wait a minute, how much money was the
Steve.
big
Peter, you
dig?
would recognize.
Absolutely outrageous.
Stop it.
Peter, can I ask you some
Absolutely
questions?
outrageous.
I just want to clarify, so Charter went to you and said, we need more money. You had a contract with them?
We had the only contract we had that was enforceable was linked to the cable franchise being, because they still had to do their due diligence. They gave an estimate of what they could pay.
All right, so you did not have a monetary
We did
contract
not,
with them? Okay.
well, we did have a monetary contract, but it was only enforceable upon the completion of the cable franchise agreement. It's the only hook that we could hold them on.
Okay.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have been here at all.
All right, so they essentially have said to you that we need whatever, $1.2 million more. And MBI is the one who said, we'll put up 50% and ask the town for 50%.
Right.
I want this clear,
Yeah.
the charter did not say we need money from the town of Egremont.
Yeah, they don't want the money from the town, they want it from the state. Okay, so
Right.
we'll
Okay, so
underwrite.
it's the state who's now decided that they need
Well,
the town of
what happened
Egremont to
is,
kick in more money.
we're willing to look at
I
it.
just want this clear
That's right.
because there's some
Yeah.
pretty nasty emails
Yeah.
going around out there.
Yeah.
I want everyone to have the
Yeah.
facts,
Yeah.
not
So-
the rumors.
So what happened is that we were trying to help the town, okay? Your allocation is your allocation. At the very same time, remember, if you built it yourself, it would have cost you, 3 times what your allocation was, or 2 times what your allocation was. So here's a better offer that is less than that.
I just want to be clear, who you're speaking for.
I'm the one,
Okay,
please,
can I just ask him a question?
you may ask him a question.
Okay, Mr. Lang.
Could
we have a mic and identification, please?
Hi, Rolf Tesson, 49 West Road. I just want to be clear who Mr. Larkin is speaking for. You are a political appointee and you are part of the Baker administration,
Yes.
is that correct?
I'm working now, I'm working for the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, Jay Ash. Okay, I'm a
Right.
special advisor. I sit in the chair of the Mass Broadband Institute. So we're out here to
You're
charge.
a political appointee.
No, I work every day.
I understand that,
Okay.
but you came in with the Baker administration.
I came in at the request of the Baker
I understand.
administration. By the way, just for record, I was a state rep out of Pittsfield, 14 years, so I've been involved in many different things.
I understand. Okay, so I just want to understand who you're representing.
I'm representing the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development,
Okay.
Jay Ash. I'm sitting in the chair of the Mass Broadband.
And this proposal was developed by charter, not with you sitting in a room with charter developing it with them.
Charter, we
Is that
said,
correct?
what happened was Charter wanted to step back from this proposal. This community and the select board were concerned that where it's Charter is stepping back. They were stepping back because the cost now became quite apparent to them that it was much higher than they anticipated. And we said to them, well, what would you suggest? So they came with a proposal. The proposal that's on the table is such that we looked at it and said, okay, if that's what you need, all right, and we're willing to pick up half the cost, is the town itself interested in accepting the 50%? Now, that's their choice. You don't have to take this proposal.
And does MBI think it's in the town's interest to have 2 broadband providers in one town?
And we have no
You have no position on it.
no position about that.
Okay.
So,
If in
Peter-
fact the town does not,
Here, Peter.
You want it?
Oh, yeah.
Chairman. Go ahead.
thank you. Lenny Fields, I live on Lund Road. If in fact the town decides that it is not interested in coming up with $500,000, that means that Charter is a business and they invested $1 million and it didn't work out.
That's right.
Given that premise,
I don't think that's the thing.
if I may continue,
Yeah.
given that premise, where does NDI stand with regard to the $500,000 that they were willing to put in to build out a system, perhaps a system that is already in the town, that is Fiber Connect, or some other?
The person.
Is there a commitment of the $500,000 for that?
No, not at this,
No.
not at this time. We don't have,
So
we don't have.
if I may continue, that implies that the only time and the only conditions under which that $500,000 would be made available is if we in the town decide to go with Charter. Is that correct?
On this proposal, yes.
Okay, we'll stay with this proposal.
Right.
So that means that essentially NDI, in whatever configuration, is essentially telling the town, the only way in which we will help funding anything there is if you go with Charter. Is that correct?
We only have one proposal. We only have
Just
one
a simple
proposal.
yes, no answer.
We only have one proposal in front of us, yes.
Okay.
To the one proposal we have in front of us.
You would be willing to look at other proposals?
We have a flexible grant program that's still available.
Peter? Excuse me. I am Mark Rogan, I was on the technology committee, and I guess I still am. Early on, we looked at a couple of different options. I don't need the microphone. I
Yes,
think
you
it-
do.
No? Okay. Early on, we looked at a lot of different options, including a municipal system. And MBI was on board with the possibility of going that route also.
Of
So
building your own.
Right, so it isn't that they're not gonna give any money.
Right.
The way I
Bruce and the
understand it is
cabinet.
MBI will not fund a startup because of the fact that it's the state's money. And under the circumstances of having a track record, a company that's just starting out does not have that, and the state will not put their money in that pot. So essentially what they were willing to do is take proven performers, and unfortunately, because of the fact that cable companies have a bad rep on service, they are the proven performers out there. So the state money is gonna go with the proven performers or with the municipal system. And that's what the boogaboo is about Fiber Connect, is they're a startup. And because of that, the state is not willing to go that route because of the risk.
That's true, but we were willing to support, are willing to support municipally owned networks. But it does require their own borrowing of money. And that we will not provide funding for a private entity that doesn't even present financials, performance bond, or a representation of what they would do to manage the business. Now, these are the questions that were left unsaid by Fiber Connect to Mass Broadband Institute when the private provider hit the street over a year ago. That's still an open to respond to. They have not responded to Monterey. And they're building here, God bless America, that's the private sector, they can, and they did.
So,
If you
Peter?
have a track record.
And thanks for your support.
Peter?
Yes.
When do they stop being a startup after 20 years?
Peter, can I?
5 years.
Want the other microphone back here?
Peter, a question for you. So if the Board of Selectmen tonight votes that we are not going to accept this proposal and we are then going to stop our negotiations with Charter, does that mean that we lose any chance of funding from MBI?
No.
No.
Your
So we
allocation-
can put an RFP out there, get proposals, you will have to screen those proposals for their sustainability, and then the town of Egremont would still get
Your
their
allocation,
funding.
your allocation is your allocation. You can determine it to do your own or whatever. The thing is, to provide money to a private provider,
Mhm.
okay, that becomes a qualification issue for us.
Right,
We wanna make sure that they have the sustainability. That one of the things.
and so doesn't the town of
That's right,
Egremont,
that's,
by the way.
and that's the reason why we have supported cable companies. They're operational, sustainable. They're gonna be here whether they or somebody else standing in their shoes tomorrow.
Okay, now,
With
another question, Peter, can we get a copy of the Make Ready report or whatever it is, the thing that National Grid said, there's 150 poles in your town that need to be replaced and here's the bill.
I probably can get that for you. It's not a real problem. What I passed around for everyone, and I think you have it, is what Make Ready entails.
Right.
Ask a question. I was gonna ask a question real quick, if you don't mind.
I'm
Mr.
not the
Larkin,
chair here, he's the chair. Go ahead.
Mr. Larkin, I know you have a very, very difficult job, and I respect the work that you do. But I think you have to understand that there are a lot of people in our community that
Can
are.
you identify yourself?
My name's Landon Calais, 13 Acre Hill Road. There is a proven winner in our community that wired 70% of the town. We're very upset that the support just seems to be generally lacking for this organization. What do we have to do as a community to recognize there is a tremendous, or to get you to recognize, to get NBI to recognize there is a tremendous amount of support locally here for that organization, and they've already proven themselves.
The problem is they do not have that long a track record. Yes, they've hung some fiber. There's many other issues that have to come forward. For example, if they want, we have what we call a payment in arrears process. And if you want to go forward with a private provider and you help them build it out, we'll make our allocation available to you. But it has to be built out. For example, the network would be fully commissioned. All premises the town provider had agreed to serve prior to the start will be covered. There's no pending or contemplated litigation. There's no arbitration pending, and all of the subcontractors are paid. The reality is that we're not opposed to the towns going in their own fashion. The only allocation available to you is the $1,070,000. Now, how far does that take you? You are now providing your public monies to a private entity, and they're gonna own the system with little track record. Now, we asked Monterey whether they would go forward with Fiber Connect, and we asked Fiber Connect the very same thing. Would you put a performance bond on your work? And they refused to do that. Now, if you're gonna build an addition to your house, your contractor would have a performance bond. These are the sort of the basic things that you would want. And at the very same time, we would suggest to the town that they sit down with the provider, and they have yet to bring something forward even in Monterey, the best practices that you should keep in mind. Encourage the protections within this agreement to protect the public money invested in their contracts, the seek performance bond, just at minimum, response time in cases whether the network's down. Do they have the capacity to do that? If you had a, heaven forbid, a tornado come through here, and you knocked out over 100 poles, what's the length of time? Now, say what you will about the cable companies. They do have critical mass that they can gain, tackle a project like this and do this. Now, yeah, you can have a contract, but getting all that stuff put back up again, it's really sort of, again, it's another make-ready adventure. In other words, where do you stand in the queue to bring your products up front before something else? And frankly, the utilities and the electrical needs come first before broadband. So there's a lot of challenges, but it's doable.
Can I have speak to you, Mr. Larkin? You know, I listened to what you have to say. And first of all, they're amazing company, Fiber Connect. Verizon, my landline went down on a Thursday. I called Verizon, they'll be there Tuesday between 8 and 7 p.m. They never showed up. They promised to move my wires. They didn't do that. Fiber Connect Saturday morning was there at 8 a.m. and hooked up a landline. That's one. I have a home in Palm Desert, California where we have Spectrum. The service is beyond belief. Bad, bad, bad. You know, you talk about if there was a hurricane here, FEMA would be the one who would have subcontractors here and not Fiber Connect, not anybody but FEMA would be putting up the poles. We all know that. So let's stop with the BS and let's get
beg to differ that FEMA would be up there.
Oh, really?
That's true.
Well, they would subcontract it out to people all over the country.
I just for your thing, I have the payment in arrears proposal that you can look at and think about. Okay, as a town, I think you should take some points of deliberation, all right, and share that with everyone. It's not that we're unopposed to people building their own, but realize this: your allocation is your allocation, and it's released upon the build out when it's done.
Who decided on that allocation?
The board of trustees, the board of directors at Mass Broadband Institute.
You mean the governor?
There's public money, there's public accountability
You
necessary.
mean the governor?
Sir, there's public there needs to be public accountability for the use of public money. That's all.
He's saying yes.
You mean the governor, and you're one of
Right,
the select
so-
board members who's realistic is acknowledging that.
So let's get, you know, the reality is that everyone that's got Fiber Connect is very happy with Fiber Connect.
Yeah.
We, the town of Egremont, the Board of Selectmen, cannot give them any taxpayer dollars or state funds without going through the request for proposals process. In this case, the state did it under some regulations that they promulgated. This board, with the technology committee's backing, other than 2 members of that, went with that proposal. The town of Egremont can issue a request for proposals and go through this whole process again, but we cannot sit here and say, we're going to give money to Fiber Connect. That would be breaking the law.
I think everyone understands that.
They don't all seem to understand that.
Well, it's another thing that can be done, Mary. May I respond to that, please, Mary? Bruce?
Yes.
Thank you. The power of the select board to make decisions about broadband and to fund it was voted on at a town meeting in 2015. That can be revoked by the town.
Sure.
And we can literally.
That means we're not doing anything because we won't have any
That can be
taxpayer dollars to
revoked
do
by the
it.
town, and the town can, without the select board, can go forward with Fiber Connect if it
The
wishes.
residents, out of your own pocket, you can.
Out of the residents' pockets.
Exactly, and that's
And
what
we
everybody's
can-
done, and
we can have a
nobody's
tax
pushed up to
revolt.
it.
Have a tax revolt. You're
And
paying for it
send
out
a
of your
portion of your,
pocket.
send a portion of your the taxes we pay to the town to Fiber Connect.
Actually, that
If you
was
want
Well,
probably
if
the
you don't pay your
people.
taxes, the town of Egremont's gonna end up owning your house, but
Chris-
that's
Chris,
neither
last
here nor there.
question, Mr.
The
Larkin.
fact of tonight was, Mr. Larkin was invited here so this board could get information on him to make a decision on how we're gonna move forward. We've now spent 40 minutes listening to history that we all already know. None of us have had a chance to really ask any questions other than me, because I'm a rude bitch when I wanna be. And we still have to make the decision tonight.
You're the only
So-
articulate person on the board.
No, I just am very loud, because I deal with children most of the time and
Chris, can I ask you a question, Mr. Larkin?
and horses, right?
Mr. Larkin, but much has been made
So I'm
about,
Dean,
much has been made about
He's
the.
been recognized.
Yeah, much has been made about the make-ready costs. I think everyone understands that the make-ready costs are so high because Fiber Connect is already on the poles and they don't therefore have the 30-foot clearance or whatever it is. So this $2 million, let's be clear, is to basically replace all the poles in Egremont because that's what you would have to do to get the necessary height to put another set of wires on the pole. So what you're saying is the town should pay to replace all the poles in the town for charter.
Not
That-
so.
That's,
Egremont has approximately 1,800 telephone poles,
well, okay, a lot of poles.
and they're talking 120.
No.
well,
Not according to these.
I've been told about 150 that are short poles, but there's other poles with other issues too. Gentleman in the back's been raising his hand, I'm not the chair.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
I'm Dean Forsman, 22 Mearns Way. We have Fiber Connect, as many of the people here do, and love it, of course. But I think what we're all upset about is the fact that, and we appreciate you coming to explain this to us, that if we could get the qualifications met by Fiber Connect, then the town could, and the state might, release the money to them. It seems like our experience with all of the cable companies and all of the phone companies we've ever dealt with has not led us to the place where we're gung-ho charter. So I think, as a group, the point is, if the state and MBI was absolutely clear about what they needed, and that Fiber Connect could satisfy those conditions, the money would be released. And it feels like charter got in here by making a proposal that they could not deliver. And then they held MBI absolutely at their request to say you had to get cable for everybody in this town too, as a part of the deal, or they wouldn't come. So they came with a false proposal, the town signed on, we voted, not all of us, but some of us voted for charter, and then they doubled the cost. We're gonna have to come up with another $500,000, and we're gonna have to have cable, and by the way, extremely slow DSL interconnections.
It's not DSL, they're bringing a fiber solution.
We're bringing fiber too?
That wasn't the original proposal.
They're bringing a fiber solution forward.
It's not.
Yeah.
Ma'am.
Well, first of all, fiber, yeah. But when we first went to meetings with Charter, they assured us that we didn't need fiber, that their system was better than, was as good as fiber and getting better, so they would have a system even better than fiber. They've lied to us consistently. They have changed their statements and their rules, and I think the select board has tried, and the technology committee tried to deal with that. My question is, I think what you're trying to say is, right now, if the select board says, okay, we're not going ahead with charter, that money, that originally $1,070,000 goes back in your pot. If we then totally fund Fiber Connect on our own.
No,
Wait.
there's a process. We have to go out for proposals.
Right.
No,
We
I'm
just
not-
can't say Fiber Connect, here's your money.
Right.
We have to start right back from
A
square
proposal
one.
to who?
It's a
To
request
anybody
for
that builds
proposal.
No,
broadband.
I'm not talking about that.
We have to do that. That's
It's
the
public money, you have to have a
law
public
requirement.
procurement. You need a public procurement to use public money.
Right.
Even though it's an allocation that we have, make available to you. Now, is it enough to manage what the needs are to build Fiber Connect to 96% of your households? That's a choice that only your procurement will determine.
Oh, So we can't just go ahead and have
No.
Fiber Connect wire everybody and then get the money from you, because we
We cannot, that would be in violation of
there's a
several
process.
state laws.
I mean, Fiber Connect could do it, and we wouldn't have to pay a dime because.
Well, and that's what's happened in some ways. In some ways, you don't have to pay anything, and they brought 200 households.
Another thing, well, Charter, have they said anything when they did this proposal about increasing their monthly prices or anything? Because, and they must know that they've lost a lot of town business, which would have made it feasible for them to come
I
here.
only know that their proposal is their rate card, and the rate card on just the broadband product, which isn't a gigabit, up and down, but the basic is, I think it's like $60 a month on the internet.
Basic.
Component, okay, and that 60 up and 4 down, 60 down and 4 up, is more than enough. I mean, that's what most people get, and it functions. Now, do you all need a gigabit? It's a question.
Technology credentials.
I like my fiber, I mean.
I know, but here's the deal, they're bringing, it's told to me, they're bringing the fiber, because they realize that at the end of the day, that's the product with less overhead and other costs going forward. So they're bringing fiber to everywhere they're building.
So they're planning to string fiber instead of the cable?
Coax.
The coax.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they're going to do that at the same $60 a month base rate. It's
Yes.
very, very hard to believe.
I've been on the technology committee, and very early in the process with Charter, they said that they were gonna put up a hybrid system where fiber would go out to neighborhoods, and then from there, they would go coaxial to the houses. Not long into the process of negotiating with Charter, they decided that they were gonna change their entire system because they were going digital, and they would put an entire fiber network in the town. That was over a year ago that they said they were gonna do that. And for anybody to today say that they're gonna put an antiquated system in, they have understood that the future is fiber, and they are designing a fiber network. And in fact, they told us that their engineers were not able to design a fiber network because they only did hybrid systems, and they were farming our town out to a company in Texas to design it for them. So this is, they have understood, they made a change. They didn't start changing their story at every turn that they've done something. They have increased the offer of what they're gonna offer us. They haven't said they were gonna give us a fiber system, then come back and say, no, we're gonna give you a hybrid system. The biggest problem with Charter is they've been taking forever to make a decision to sign the agreement with us. That's the problem with Charter.
So far.
And in the meantime, there's a fiber system in place for 70% of the houses.
Could we do a special case?
Do you have something?
Sure, I
No,
have
you
to-
better.
Sure, if you like, I can.
I'm ready to move on, end this subject.
We should introduce
Bill Solomon?
Bill Solomon, our legal counsel on the technology committee and for the select board.
Hi, good evening.
Can you get the mic?
You're gonna need a mic.
Sure, yeah, thank you.
I don't have one.
Thank you, good evening. Board members, if I could I have a few points or questions to make. So this is of course a critically important matter for the town, and hope you'll bear with me. I'll try not to go too long. Let me just begin by saying that I do a lot of cable TV licensing. I've worked with over 120 communities. I was instrumental in getting Chappaquiddick built by Comcast, do a lot of build-out work. I've never seen a process more poorly handled than by the MBI in the state here. It's mind-boggling. And I don't say that, I have no personal stake in it. I'm shocked. And let me say that all of a sudden, now, it's a matter between the Charter and the town. As the board remembers, when Mr. Larkin was here last time I was here, this board, through me and then on its own, specifically asked Mr. Larkin if this board could have 2 days to review the contract between the MBI and Charter. And he said yes. They backed out of that unilaterally.
I never saying yes.
Yes, you did. Well, if we
I never said yes at all.
You did.
Did.
The board members are here. They asked and you said yes. It's good to have it taped this time. And then they got back to say, the gentleman in MBI got back and said, well, your licensing is yours, but that wasn't shared. And the reason we articulated we wanted that shared at the time is we said that that the town is not a party to that agreement. It would like to be a party, but the town's not a party. And the town won't have veto power over that agreement. But there are some things that the town may be able, through its review, to assist the MBI with to make that a better agreement. So what the town's being told now is that the MBI's point of view is that that agreement is factless, it's unenforceable. Because under the terms articulated by the MBI, if Charter unilaterally decided not to proceed ahead, not only not to proceed ahead in a timely way, but not to proceed ahead with a license, they entered an agreement which provided over $1 million to a company, but didn't bind that company. No town in the Commonwealth would sign an agreement with a cable operator that allowed that cable operator afterwards to unilaterally withdraw from that agreement or to make it such that it couldn't proceed. Now, all contracts are based on good faith. It's inconceivable that agreement just unilaterally allows Charter to withdraw. So let me just make one general point and then back to the scenario here. I can't express more strongly to the board and more so to the public, the engaged, the caring public of Egremont. Step back from this and don't look at it from the perspective of Fiber Connect or Charter. The immediate issue for the board, and this is following up on Mary's comment, is that the town and the board and the town accepted in good faith the work of the MBI. The town detrimentally relied on that. The MBI has not spoken to the town about its conversations with Charter. Talk about regulatory capture. They talk to Charter all the time. And out of nowhere, they come up with, hey, here's a proposal. You want to sign it tonight? So that it's important for folks to step back. Allow the board to look at this in an objective way, to make sure it holds the MBI's feet to the fire, to do what's legally proper and correct based on a contract that was entered into in good faith. I've mentioned to the board, I think the board should actually vote to issue as the issuing authority report. Well, let me just say this, that in the hallway I was told by Mr. Larkin, well, the fact that the cable license isn't done, it's no one's fault, both sides. This board knows that for months it turned things around in days or a week and then waited for Charter to get back, change of personnel, they needed more time. In fact, if I understand it correctly, in August when I suggested the board issue the issuing authority report, it was Mr. Larkin asking the board to please hold up, wait, don't do that.
What are you talking about?
That's what I was told by
Please.
So that it can't possibly be that the MBI believes it has an unenforceable agreement. And if their answer to that, which was given here today, is it's unenforceable because the town hasn't been able to reach a cable license with Charter that has sort of refused to move ahead, my suggestion is the board issue the issuing authority report based on Charter's last submission, give them exactly what they submitted to you. And then it's up to Charter. And I don't believe that Charter can unilaterally withdraw in a process that was as a corporation that has knowledge and experience. No telecommunication provider enters into a sophisticated agreement with the Commonwealth for millions of dollars and doesn't do due diligence on make ready. So if I can through the chair, is it the MBI's position that the contract, which they didn't need help on, they said, Mr. Larkin said they had the experts, that contract allowed Charter to withdraw from that contract if after that due diligence and after responding to the MBI's RFP and signing that contract, is it the MBI's position that later on the Charter could say, oh, well, we were mistaken, so we're not going to proceed ahead? Is that the position of the MBI? I'd like to understand that.
The MBI contract with Charter.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
The MBI, you
No.
know?
No.
No, you can't. Hello?
Yes.
The MBI contract with Charter protected your allocation. No money has been spent of your allocation to Charter. The only first time that it would be spent, an allocation of it in milestones, was upon the cable franchise agreement. So there's been no money, the town's allocation, spent for Charter. Charter has spent money. They put poll applications in, and they've done their own due diligence. And of course, they had to, because they were based on an estimate when they made their proposal, and it was an estimate on 5 towns with critical mass that changed 2 or 3 towns.
Mr. Chairman, with great respect.
So my point I'm trying to make is no dollars have been expended by the state for Charter in this endeavor.
Mr. Chairman, of course, that has nothing to do with anything. The question is.
That wasn't the point he was making.
The question is, did Charter sign an enforceable agreement through a bidding process, having their lawyers look at it, committing to build out 96% of Egremont? Is it the position of the MBI that contract, having been signed, can unilaterally be ended by Charter by saying, well, we made a mistake, it's a lot more money? And under that theory, why would any town give extra money? Why would, if that could just happen again? I mean, at what point would that end? So that question has to be answered. And just as Ms. Larkin's correct about one thing, they have the experts. They wanted to have that agreement done without any input from the town. They want to have responsibility, and I respect that. And that responsibility should be, if they believe that their contract is not enforceable, then they need to step up and pay the $1 million. It's on them. They were the ones who said that they were going to enter a contract, proceed ahead. That contract is enforceable. If they think it's not, or if they think they made a mistake in enforceability, step to the plate, continue taking responsibility, and pay the $1 million. But to ask the town for $500,000 based on $607,000 on a when there's a contract in place, and by the way, a contract where, as discussed, there's not even a basis for knowing if there's a good faith argument that the factual basis is true. I don't really think it's that important. There are people who can check the factual basis, who can check it, but if the factual basis is unimportant, the real basis is the legal basis. How does Charter get out of that contract? A few more points. Is there any other community, through the chair, is there another community where this sort of significant cost overrun has occurred other than Egremont?
There's towns that are entertaining proposals from Comcast and Charter beyond their allocations, yes.
No, I'm just asking, is there another community where a contract's been signed by the MBI, where then the company has come back and said it's going to be another $1 million, we were wrong? Is there any other?
No, but still, as I said earlier, it's been unenforceable in its design in that there's no money paid out unless the franchise agreement is signed. That was an agreement that we had in place. It was the only way to get up to the table to make a presentation to this community.
The question is, it's not, do you have an enforceable agreement?
We do not. I keep telling you, we don't until the franchise agreement is signed.
And the answer is that then, as I said, on one hand, the town can issue that. Let me ask you, through the chair, based on the written record and your discussions, do you have any question which party has delayed the process to getting a cable license signed in Egremont? If you do, you do. If you don't, you don't.
There's a he said, she said litany of charges and countercharges.
Okay, all right. Well, we know that's not accurate, even though you may believe it.
I'm just saying.
So that you're indicating you have an enforceable agreement. And that
only by virtue of
and so my recommendation to the board is that you issue the issue and authority report. You say to Charter that their submission they provided will be the cable license, and let's proceed ahead. If Charter, as I said, a contract has a good faith obligation. You know, if someone's going to believe that somehow they can unilaterally make it such that they don't get an agreement with the town, they do everything to delay and not to get to that agreement, and that they can cause their own breach not to be a legal breach based on that defense,
I don't think that flies.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So what's their responsibility, okay, if the agreement is signed and it doesn't become enforceable? In other words, you're asking them to do things that you wouldn't do yourself.
What's that?
You want an agreement signed, but you don't want them to do their due diligence.
Their due diligence was done when you went out for an RFP. And I promise you, I've done 150 cable licenses. There's no company that would enter into a multi-million-dollar contract with the NBI and say, we have no idea what that is. Or that contract would say, it's not about the money, it's about the contract. And if that contract truly was based on, they had to do due diligence. And through the chair, if I might, I want to make a debate, but I want to finish it up because I think it's important. I'll be done soon. If the NBI thought the process was that there's a contract signed, but then they had a right to do due diligence and they could back out of it, that contract would say that. This contract you signed doesn't say that. It was based upon this company doing due diligence. The idea that later on they can think, well, they've recalculated and get out of the contract, I think makes no sense in any good faith legal world. I believe the town has been harmed by the actions of the NBI, and you're now in a position where time has gone by, cost has gone up, circumstances have been changed, and I don't think the question for the board is which of these alternatives do you take at this last minute being proposed, but rather to pursue the NBI, both first politically, by making sure that the people who the NBI reports to understand what has been done here by the NBI and ask therefore them to step up to the plate and take responsibility for a process that should be completed based on their very own contract. Final points, and I'll be done. I also recommend that the board issue vote to authorize the chair to issue the issuing authority report. Let's not allow the NBI to hide behind the fiction that somehow that there's been unavoidable delay in the licensing process for reasons that they can't judge because they hear different things from different parties. The problem is they speak to Charter all the time and they don't speak to you. That's not serving the public. Final points. And through the chair, I was wondering, since Mr. Larkin indicated that there's been no other community where this problem of higher make-ready work has occurred, I was wondering if the NBI had a basis for articulating why that happened here and nowhere else.
Can I answer that question? Yes, there are towns that have higher make-ready costs. Shutesbury, for example, has almost a tripling of make-ready costs. There are make-ready costs that are occurring in some of these HED last-mile grant towns. That's why we set aside $12 million. At the same time, in this case, that's why we're coming forward with $607,000.
But that's why you signed. That's why you signed an agreement before. And the difference is Shutesbury took the risk.
My point is, we're trying to address issues as they arise. This has been an unseen or unforeseen, but we protected the corpus, we protected the dollars, so that the town's allocation are still the town's allocation. And we're also willing in the NBI to come in and meet with half the gap. So that's a good faith effort.
Mr. Chairman, it's lawyers are hamstrung by their legal education, financial people by their financial education. It's not a financial question. Final point. The difference with Shutesbury and towns like that, Shutesbury, as I understand it, they're going out and building their system. They said they will build it, they believe there are benefits, and they will take the risk. And when they took that approach and took that risk, yes, there's always going to be unforeseen costs, and they could be higher. What's different here is the NBI said to you, we have a plan that can better protect the town. And we can protect you so much, we don't even need to know what you think about that agreement. We have the experts and we're entering into it. And having done that and allowed there for a year to go by, and for the town to say, yes, we will take this safer course. Towns are often not in the business of risk. You took a course that had a higher level of safety and protection. It's like kind of like on the waterfront, right? Rod Steiger said he'd protect Marlon Brando. They said they would protect you. And they had a process and an agreement. And that's what that process and agreement in good faith or says. And they need to live by that process and agreement and protect the town. If they don't want to do that because they've decided that they rather get out of it, then they need to come to you with the funding so you could do now what would have been done if they pursued their agreement as written and as intended. So with that, that's my recommendation to the board.
Jeff, you're gonna be the last one.
I'm Jeff Lazarus, Mountain View Road, and I just have I think it's more of a legal question for Attorney Solomon. Is it required, is it necessary for the town to issue the issuing authority report if the select board decides that they're just not interested in pursuing charter any further? Or can we just say, we're done with that and move on to the next thing?
That's a policy question. I can't answer the policy question, but I can say that the board, if it so chose as a policy decision, would be within its rights to say that regardless of how the board wants to proceed going forward, regardless of which company or which process, that the MBI should not be off the hook for putting the town in this position by either not properly interpreting their contract or negligently drafting their contract, particularly after you offered to help them and they rejected that offer.
And we're a third-party beneficiary in a regular lawsuit.
Okay, so let's get straight to the $607,000, which I think is outrageous. I think it's outrageous for National Grid to all of a sudden decide that their infrastructure needs to be upgraded on the back of the taxpayers, first off. I think it's outrageous that anybody, charter, MBI, comes to the town and asks that the taxpayers have to upgrade National Grid's infrastructure. So I personally would vote not to put forth the $607,500. I don't think that the town should issue the issuing authority report. I think that then just ties us into moving forward with charter. And at this point, I don't want to do that. I would make a motion that the town of Egremont opt out of the charter proposal at this time and move forward with a request for proposals. Put it back in the hands of the technology committee, let them draft the proposal, get it out for under the procurement laws like it needs to be, and review proposals in the best interest of the residents of the town of Egremont.
Here, here.
I'll second that proposal.
I have one.
If I may. Yeah. There is a motion on the floor. I want to be very clear right now and once again that I will not vote on this motion. I will recuse myself for the well-known reason, if there's someone in the room that doesn't know. One of my wife's clients is our private provider here in town. So the motion on the floor is something that I admire my colleagues, and I admire the fact that the select board is as productive and shares so many common visions about so many important priorities of what I think our community has. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Can I ask a question from the floor before you vote? To Peter Larkin, of the 9 towns that are listed as charter towns, I believe Princeton already has a cable agreement.
Yep.
Of the other 8 towns, how many of them have signed a cable agreement at this point?
Sheringham has, Peru has, Hancock has signed it, but has not been finalized with charter.
the,
Maybe I should ask how many have not?
the only one right now is that I'm, well, New Marlboro has just newly been presented. Egremont has not been. West Rockbridge is signed, Lanesboro is signed, Hancock is signed, except it hasn't been finalized from Charter and Hancock. Peru has signed, Hinsdale is signed, Tyringham is signed, and as they say, New Marlboro is new, and Princeton is signed. So the one that's really sort of lagging behind happens to be Egremont.
Now, did these other towns that signed have those money?
What?
Whoa!
It's true.
Oh.
The only thing is, we completed our charter license in July,
And one other,
June.
the one last part of it
It
is,
just gets signed.
they wanted all these towns in order to do this. Would the other towns still be valid if they didn't have Egremont?
They'd be valid. They've signed the contracts.
They
signed their franchise contracts.
Mr. Chairman, last thing, and I promise I may just make one final point in response to the motion, just to, I think, give some.
The motion is on the floor.
Yes, may I?
Sure.
My suggestion on the issue authority report was not in effect to say that we'll issue that and they'll sign. The only question I think for the board is, does the, and the policy decision based on the motion, you may have your path. Does the board allow the MBI and the charter to in effect have created what I view as a breach of a contract, and then they walk away because you say not? The concept of the issue authority report, and it doesn't have to be that way, was basically to say, it's not the town walking away from this, it's these folks. And if they walk away from it, then frankly, I think that they should have to be, to compensate the town for the detrimental reliance that the town's undone. So the question of the board is, and you have more wisdom than I would, is you want to let it go? In other words, plague on both their house, on the charter house and move on? Or do you want to find some way to say, it's not the town walking away from this, it's charter and the MBI not proceeding in good faith, and they need to come to the table so you can move on with a new solution. That's the only question I see.
I tend to concur with you, Bill. I think we've been left holding our hand where we don't like to put it, so.
Can I ask a question?
I think we're about ready to
One
take a
question
vote.
which I think is very important, which is the agreement that MBI signed with Charter was for 5 towns, correct?
It was, the proposal that came to us was unseverable when it was presented. It went through like 3 different edits. By this I mean, they first came at us with 8 different towns. And they changed it around 4 or 5 different times. And at the end of the day, it was a benefit for the Commonwealth. But every one of them were dependent upon cable franchise agreements being signed by the town. They're individual contracts for each town.
Right, but the money, the whole basis for that agreement with MBI was that the MBI was gonna give Charter all this money to help them do the build-out, correct?
It was using the state, they were willing to go with the state
So,
allocation.
my question is, since there was supposed to be a package deal with the 5 towns, you've said now that all of the other towns except Egremont have signed the contract, and have signed the license. How is MBI gonna give the money to them because they haven't fulfilled their agreement to
It
work
wasn't
with all 5
it
towns?
was a 5-town proposal, okay? And as they presented it was unseverable. Our agreements were individually per town. And every town that affected their cable franchise agreement has been made, the allocations are being made available to those towns.
So the early agreement that they had to do 5 towns to be able to get that money went by the wayside. Once they said, yeah, they could negotiate with individual towns.
Okay,
then
Jonathan.
Other towns didn't matter. Okay.
Peter, if I had operated my house the way you guys operated this, do a proposal and then raise the price and then say, so I think we're gonna call for a vote.
If I could just say one more thing before we do, George, I want to thank you for saying what you just did when you recused yourself. And with all due respect and a huge thanks for your work on the technology committee, because of your conflict, I would like to ask that you not be a part of the technology committee any longer.
That's fine. I got no problem with that.
All right, thank you. And I don't feel that
I've done everything I can do.
I don't feel a Board of Selectmen member is actually needed, and it may be a good idea that a Board of Selectmen member is not, since this board is the one that will have to make the decision in the end
after the technology
I
committee makes a
agree with that.
recommendation.
I agree with that. I kind of, Jeff was my co-chairman because I was quite uncomfortable with, my predecessor was chairman. And I didn't think that was right, but what you're proposing is better.
Thank you, George. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well done.
Thank you.